Hello, good afternoon. I'm Aradna Tile. I'll be chairing today's excellent panel on the making of Children of 9/11, Our Story. This moving two-hour documentary transmitted on Channel 4 this week on Monday, and of course is now available streaming on All 4. You can watch it in the USA on PBS under the title Generation 9/11 on the 31st of August, when you'll also be able to watch in France and Germany on ARTE, followed by international release across various countries. I'm really delighted today to welcome this panel to talk about this really important film. Next month will be 20 years since those 4 planes were hijacked and deliberately crashed, resulting in the deaths of thousands. This film follows 6 children born after their fathers died on that day to unveil the hidden costs of the tragedy. And its commissioning process was unique and a story in itself. So today we're bringing together the commissioners and production staff to explore the filming of these intimate stories. As the title suggests, and given current events, there may be some really distressing issues discussed in today's session. Remember, you can ask questions throughout the session today using the chat on the YouTube page. I will try and come to as many questions as I can, and I'll largely leave them till the end, but please do feel free to send in your questions at any time. Children of 9/11, Our Story is an Arrow Pictures production and was co-funded by Channel 4 here in the UK, PBS in the United States, and ARTE in France. We have 2 of those commissioners joining us today. From the US, we have Bill Gardner, VP of Programs and Development at PBS. And here in the UK, we have Danny Horan, Head of Factual for Channel 4. On the production side, we're very pleased to have John Smithson, Creative Director of Arrow Pictures, Lucy Ridout, Executive Producer at Arrow Pictures, and Liz Merman, the Director, who's also joining us from the US. Welcome all, and thanks so much for joining us. There's so much to talk about today. I'd like to look at the production process as well as this really interesting 3-way international commissioning model, which we're seeing becoming ever more popular in television today. But first, let's meet some of these children of 9/11.
Miley Raquel Hale.
Diane Hale McKenzie.
Richard B. Hall.
Stanley R. Hall.
You have so many eyes on you being one of the youngest kids.
And my father, Sebastian Gorky, who I never met because I was in my mom's belly.
For a 9-year-old, you can't really comprehend it, but being able to be a part of that was something extraordinary.
He scribbled over his name. My mom wanted us to put these over our beds.
Claudunia, hey!
These are his sunglasses, I know that. When we sent over the home videos, and I heard my dad speak on one of the videos. That was the first time I ever heard his voice.
Hey, Stinky Butt, you gonna dance or what?
I think, and just with tragedy in general, I think it's very easy to kind of shut down and hate the world around you because, you know, why would something like that happen to me? But I don't know if that's more of like a grief thing and then you get over that. But I was born and it already happened. And I just grew up being like, okay, this is what, you know, my life is.
So, John, welcome. As creative director, you were responsible for the development of this idea and contacting those contributors. And we've seen there are around about 105 unborn children whose fathers were killed at 9/11. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of the idea and how you went about developing it.
Well, I've been responsible for 8 or 9 9/11 films in the last 20 years, and all were about the day itself, the experience of the day. And I had a really strong feeling about wanting to do something for the 20th anniversary, but wanting to do something different and really looking forward from the day rather than going back to the day, and really not yet again dealing with all those powerful archive shots that we covered so many times. And really from that sprung the idea of Generation 9/11. And it was really initially in conversation with Bill at PBS, who very strongly was saying the same thing about looking forward, not back. And then we sort of hit on that specific, the kids, and then we came up with the even tighter organizing principle that they would be children with that very powerful link that they were in the womb when their fathers were died in the Pentagon on one of the planes or in the Twin Towers. And so obviously they grew up with the loss of a father they never knew. And that really was how it started. And with Bill, and then with all our other partners thereafter.
And so how did you go about reaching out to these 105 potential contributors? What was the process, and how do you even start to do that?
Incredible painstaking research over what stretched to 9 months. There are organizations that can point you towards some of the kids, but there's a lot we found that had never been approached before. It was 105. I think we actively communicated with about 80 of them. And then it was a question of really whittling down, trying to represent as widely as possible the families with the tragic loss of a father on that day. So I think we went from 55, and then with our partners, we had a short list of around 20 individuals, and it's really all agreeing from that on the 6 or 7 that we selected for the film. But it was a 9-month process to find and to talk to, and just to get that balance, to try and come up with a representative picture of this Generation 9/11.
Thank you. And I'd like to go to Lucy. You were the exec producer at Arrow Pictures, and I understand that you came on board once the film was greenlit. How did you go about choosing your final 6 or 7 contributors from the 20?
Wasn't an easy task. I'll start with that, as we all know, when you're trying to cast. But we felt it was very important that 9/11, although it happened, in America, in New York, that it's a global story. And it was very important to get representation that touched as many countries as possible. So when you meet the contributors and their families, we have people from, whose families reached Poland, to Germany, to Brazil, people whose fathers were painters and decorators, or someone who was in the military, somebody who's on the plane. We wanted to really represent the wide impact of 9/11 on the world, and that was really important to us.
Yeah, I understand that your contributors come from around 6 different states in the US, and actually touch around 5 or 6 countries internationally in terms of heritage or subsequently immigrating as well. So, I mean, I think it's really clear that the diversity of the contributors, their backgrounds, their father's jobs, where they live now, and an element of who they've become was obviously really important to you. I also, we spoke earlier about the decision to include a contributor called Faraz, who is from Yemen, and his father was killed helping to rescue people during the subsequent rescue mission, and never knew his father because he didn't live in the States. He, however, was born before 9/11. Tell us a little bit about your decision to include him amongst the others who were still in the womb.
Absolutely. So we felt very, very importantly from the beginning, as a wider team, that it was important to have a Muslim voice as part of that, to talk about the impact on those communities. And there were very few, like 1 or 2, maybe only one, who fitted into that lens of not having been born on 9/11. And as you can understand, this is a very brave process for any contributor to be involved in, and they felt very strongly that they weren't ready to go on this journey. But we didn't want to just give up at that point, so we searched really hard, and we found Fares, who was living in Yemen, and his father was based in New York, and was preparing the visas for the family to come over when the tragedy struck. But Fares had never met his father; he was only 2 or 3, so we felt that still fitted our lens, that he grew up without the father he never knew, but he was also able to give us that sort of wider global and sort of the Muslim voice in the film that was so important.
Yeah. And was it important to you that he subsequently, I think for the last year or two, does live in the United States now, although he grew up in Yemen?
I mean, it was important in the sense that it was practically helpful, given we were filming during COVID, to have everyone in America. But also part of his story was the wider impact in the Middle East. He was in Yemen, he planned to stay in Yemen, then the war hit. To get out of Yemen, he had to wait on his own for his mother, wait to look after his mother while his brother went to get a visa in America. And then, subsequently, well, you hear the story in the film, how they go on a small fishing boat, which should have been for 25 people, and 300 of them travel to get the visa and then come to America. And so we felt that actually his journey, which his life would have been so different had 9/11 not happened, he wouldn't have had to go through all of that, was really important.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting as I was watching the film how we follow the lives over about 19 to 20 years, looking back on old footage of these children growing up and where they are now and how they've taken different journeys. And I think it's fair to say that the thing that everyone has in common internationally is exploring the impact that 9/11 had on you. So I think that's really interesting to kind of look at how his story was very different to those who grew up in America.
Absolutely, and we felt that was important. And you touched on the personal archive, and that was obviously quite a key part of casting as well. We wanted to be able to see, our young adults grow up, and you sort of, depending on when they're born, see the birthday parties where dad wasn't there, or see the graduations, and that, but you feel closer to them as contributors.
Yeah. And Liz, you directed Children of 9/11. Your background includes filming portraits of Michelle Obama and Nancy Reagan for CNN. Is this quite different?
Well, yes, but I should say that the Nancy Reagan and Michelle Obama were more of a shift from my usual filmmaking than this film was. I've done a lot of films with young people. I do a lot of observational films, and I do a lot of intimate films. So this was kind of up my alley.
So talk us through the actual filming. I'd like to sort of understand a little bit more about the process that you took to really kind of, facilitate, if you like, this observational documentary, and the title is Children of 9/11, Our Story. What were your methods for helping the contributors to tell their own story in their own voice?
Well, obviously the approach, I mean, the plan changed radically thanks to COVID. Initially, it was going to be much more, it was going to be observational. We were going to spend a, decent amount of time with each of these contributors, which I think is an important point to pick up on in terms of casting. And Lucy mentioned this briefly, but one of the most important things was to make sure that each of our contributors understood how much we would be asking of them, both emotionally, in terms of talking to their family about things they hadn't spoken about before, thinking about asking themselves questions they hadn't asked before. But also, as we realized that we weren't going to get to the States quite as quickly as we thought we would, we came up with ideas about video diaries and, encouraging them to film on their phones so we could track that year without actually being there. So that was the first step. And our producer, Abby Heron, did a huge amount of work kind of coaxing these 18 and 19-year-olds to deliver what we needed, which wasn't always easy. But they gave us some amazing stuff with an intimacy we would never have got with a film crew. And then we did some remote shooting with, you see in the film, we kind of introduced the remote shooting with some shots of the contributors setting up the camera. And we did 2 days of that with everybody. And that turned out to be incredibly helpful because we got really intimate conversations. I was sort of appear on a screen in their living room or at their kitchen table. And they would have these very profound conversations that many of them hadn't had before. And by the time we actually met them in the spring and went with a crew, we had a relationship and we'd been on a bit of an emotional journey already. So we were able to focus quite quickly and efficiently on the things we wanted to film. We were able to get an intimacy and a naturalness that we wouldn't have if we just flown in without doing all this other work. And then we did a lot of filming outside because of COVID, which also I think helped a lot with the tone of the interviews. They're more reflective. They're less sort of, under the lights in a studio interrogations. They're much more, you're staring at the water, staring at the trees. And I think it allowed them to be in their minds a bit. So yeah, it was an interesting journey and our approach evolved as we went along.
Yeah, I really like this idea of a box cam, which I understand you shipped to all of the contributors in advance. I mean, it sort of harks to keeping a journal, if you like, and that sort of documentary program making. Did you feel a difference? I mean, I know that you said that you'd obviously personally built a relationship, but then suddenly turning up with a full film crew and filming things in a very different way. How did that affect the contributors, or did it?
Well, first of all, I think they were surprised. we were so professional because we'd just been this strange little contraption that they'd had to put together on their kitchen table. And with one of the contributors, they opened the box and the camera fell out. I mean, it wasn't always easy, but they were all very game. And so I think that once we actually met them and showed up as a proper film crew, we had a great team. It was a small team. We got along with everybody really well. And I think that they had the idea of collaboration in their minds. And I think that's a really important word in this film, not just with the co-production, but with the participants. Because they'd been through this, they understood that they had to be a bit more active and that we could talk together about what they were doing. And, I think they seemed to enjoy it. I mean, the feedback we got afterwards and since then, I think that's part of what makes the film work, is that, they're fully in this process and they're really with us the whole time.
Yeah. John, I'd like to come back to you again, sort of going back to what you were saying at the beginning of, obviously we're coming up to the 20th anniversary. You want to look forward. To what extent do you feel you were able to live up to the idea that you had? Because obviously you're working with people where you're discovering their story and that's a story you want to tell. And I wondered, to what extent is this a 9/11 story, or is this a story about Generation Z and 6-7 young people?
It was nerve-wracking because the only voice in the film was the kids and a little bit of their moms, their brothers, their sisters, and they had to be good. There was no host, there was no narration, no experts, no one pontificating about their mental well-being. We were going to win or we were going to lose on the quality of the kids' testimony, and because of the conditions that Liz was talking about, it was remarkably unfiltered and authentic and unproduced. It was a genuine voice, and that's what we were working with. And I used to worry, would we sustain on the American versions and the French version? It's 2 hours. That's a long documentary. Could we ever sustain? But I had at the back of my mind, I grew up, my first job was at Granada, where I watched the Michael Apted 7 Up series emerge and be the global sort of hit that it was. And that gave me confidence that they did it with Apted. And I'd seen a brilliant film 2-3 years ago American film called Minding the Gap, about 3 young kids growing up in the Rust Belt, which was in their voices, and remarkable things had happened to those kids. So you knew you could pull it off, but it was a real cutting room film as well. And to give them credit, we were given constant encouragement by Bill, by Danny, by ARTE to do it this way. And also, you make an important point, and I noticed some of the reviews picked up on that. It's a very different 9/11 film because it is about 6 or 7 kids growing up in this turbulent 20 years of America, but they have this unique attachment to an event that has defined those 20 years. And I think we were strongly encouraged, and maybe Bill and Danny would speak to this, to hear that voice, not just endlessly go back to the day, which none of them, a lot of them didn't even know about it until they were 8 or 9. So we were quite deliberately in that territory of sort of being a 9/11 film, but a different one, and one that talks about life in the 20 years afterwards quite deliberately as well. And we were strongly encouraged by all of our partners to go along that track, but it was scary because you just don't know if you've got the material to sustain that running length.
Yeah, and thank you for talking about that process. Just for the audience, that we talk about 6 or 7 contributors. There are slightly different versions of Children of 9/11, Our Story, here in the UK on Channel 4 compared to PBS Generation 9/11 and ARTE, which brings us to a really interesting point. And Bill and Danny, I'd love to bring you in here. It's still a fairly unique model of commissioning to do this kind of 3-way international commission. I really like to hear a bit more about that. Bill, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about where the idea came from and at what stage you felt that a co-commission was the appropriate way to go.
Sure, I'm very glad. Very familiar with the day and what it was. And for me, I felt, I didn't need to relive that. And there was plenty of media that would be reliving that. But what happened afterward? How did we respond? For someone of some of our ages, I think 9/11 was looked at as kind of the trigger for a new age, so to speak. I mean, how do kids growing up now feel about that? When you look back at the world that they've lived through for the last 20 years, how much of it was impacted by 9/11, how much of it was impacted by other things, and the repercussions of it. I think the conversations that we've had about Ferris, I thought that the way that Lucy laid that out is exactly right. I mean, even though he grew up in Yemen, you can't say at all, letting alone his relationship with his father, that everyone in Yemen hasn't been impacted by 9/11 in some way. And I think that oftentimes in the States, we tend to think about everything in our own point of view, but this is clearly, while it happened here, it was very much a global event, global impact. And in speaking with people like Danny and John, like these are sentiments we share. We talk about these types of things. So for me at PBS and representing PBS, we want to have these types of partnerships that allow us to tell stories that might not otherwise happen. And I would just wrap up the answer to your question by saying that this is how it goes when you talk to like-minded individuals and you think about the types of statements that you want to make as broadcasters. When you have an opportunity to do something that you think can really say something different with like-minded partners, you seize it and you jump on it and you take advantage of the opportunity it provides.
Thanks, Will. I mean, you can truly call this an international program, all the way from commissioning through to the contributors. And Danny, how long was that development period? Obviously, you've been talking for quite a while, and to what extent do you each come to the room with your different views and what you're looking for on what works for your audience on your channels?
I think at the very beginning, the headline idea that John came to us with was straightforward. It didn't there was some nuance and it changed a bit, but actually trying to find a film that was future facing about 9/11 was a thing that really appealed to us. Exactly the same thing that Bill's saying, appealed to them too, because we ourselves have made lots of programs like PBS have done too, where it's retelling the events of the day and the sort of immediate impact it may have had. But what we've not had is a film which really is about hope. It's massively about hope, actually, is what I take from it. And I always thought that's what it would deliver, is these young kids, they might not have firsthand witnessed the dramatic trauma of the day, but what they have felt that, and the repercussions of that they've had in their families for 20 years. But most of them, all of them in the film, have a sort of extraordinary young people who've got amazing hope and a very insightful view of the world, which was, we hoped that would be the case, of course. So when we started to develop it, which we did a paid development period. We hoped John and his team would find those contributors, and we were heartened when those started to come through and realized it was a film we definitely need to be part of and invest in. And in some ways, when we were in the commissioning process in Channel 4, some people in the building were asking, do we think it will do well? Does 9/11, does the younger generation 9/11, will it resonate? Is it just going to be a lot of American voices? And of course, well, one is mostly American voices, but of course there is Faraz, who's from Yemen, as you've mentioned. But and we were keen as well to have a very diverse range of stories. And I think this story, 9/11, was a huge world event of the generation that's on this call. Even it's probably the greatest defining event for many reasons, and continues to be. Even like look at the sort of ramifications fallout of Afghanistan in the last few days. That all started. Much of it started because of 9/11, and that's now possibly going to have a similar impact around the world with the Taliban taking control in Afghanistan. And that is a story that connects with 9/11, of course. And Bill and I had lots of conversations separately and together with John and ARTE about this project, and we just very like-minded about this subject and others. I mean, Bill and I are doing one other together, big co-commission together. There is a commercial interest for us to be doing co-commissions with other platforms and streamers and broadcasters around the world. We've got stuff with Netflix, but it's very easy to say that's what we want to do, but actually finding the like-minded people who are in those seats at that particular time deciding what gets commissioned is not always easy. But I find it's been great with Bill. We've got very similar interests, and we want to try and do more together, and ARTE too. So.
Yeah, and the structure of the story. I mean, of course, it all starts. The story that is told in the film starts from 9/11, but you touch on a huge range of current affairs and issues, largely in America, but across the world. We cover the recent American elections. We cover shootings in schools. There's an absolute, and of course, not to mention the civil war in Yemen, which you've already alluded to. There is a huge amount in here, where suddenly you think, how did you pack all of that into 2 hours? What was the thinking in terms of how you would structure the film? So starting from 9/11, moving forward, and the sorts of questions that you were asking the contributors and their experiences, going through the ages, through the 20 years. Where did that structure come from? Was that something that you thought of in advance, or did it come out in the edit? Lucy, could you talk a bit about that?
I can talk a bit about that. Yes, I mean it's really sort of co-question with Liz, who was directing it. I think the wonderful challenge and outcome that came from this is obviously as a group of people of sort of certain ages, and as naturally as producers and directors, you sit down and you want to plan a film. But the premise behind this is that these people's story. So you can write down as much as you want what you want them to talk about, but you might say, tell me about this event. And they go, I was 8, I don't really remember. And then that kind of gets thrown out quite quickly. So it was very much a collaboration with the contributors in working out what events do they remember and what shaped their lives, and then taking the film around that. So it was very much in the edit, and it was very collaborative. But I think Liz can add more to that sort of journey. You know, it's edgy to try and do that, but I think we ended up with a much truer film to their story and what has impacted their lives than us trying to produce onto them what we thought their lives, what they should be telling us about their lives.
Yeah, Liz, I'd love to hear more about that. And also if there are any common themes that you found particularly surprising and kind of shaped the journey that you subsequently took.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea, John mentioned 7-Up, and obviously, a retrospective 7-Up is a different kind of prospect, but that was in our minds. We kind of, initially we made a timeline of big events that we thought would have impacted their lives. And as Lucy said, some of them, they had no memory of it all, and some of them they had a lot to say about. And the nice thing about an ensemble piece is that you can give different contributors different pieces to respond to. So we did a lot of timelines with them. We did 2 interviews with each of them, a timeline interview, which was about life passing. This is a very American story, so we wanted kind of American, big American moments, getting your driver's license, graduating from high school, middle school, obviously school shootings, as you said. And then, I ran through all of that with them, kind of slices. We had the idea from the beginning that we would use chronology in these sort of slices of life and looking at where our different contributors were at these key moments. But also in terms of the themes that jumped through, I think one thing that a lot of them said, almost all of them said, and there are very few things that almost all of them said, was that there was a sense after 9/11 of America coming together. It might have been in a slightly xenophobic way, whatever, but there was a sense of unity and patriotism that was very strong. And when they came of age politically, their world was defined by division, very aggressive division, and they were all very aware of that. And I think what was really interesting for me, and I think also for the contributors and hopefully for an American audience, is that in addition to all the other diversities we talked about, we have a real diversity in political views among these kids. And, to hear each of them really earnestly talk about the Trump years, Obama, Black Lives Matter, all of these, things which loom very large in their lives right now, from very different perspectives, but by the time they're saying what they're saying, you've really come to identify with them and, feel for them. And so even if they say something you don't agree with, it's much harder to react the way you would if you were watching a news show where people are fighting with each other. So I think that the idea of how America finds unity again is kind of a theme that I found really interesting, and not that we even begin to answer it, but there's something hopeful, as Danny said earlier, about listening to all of these voices together, struggling with these questions very earnestly, and with, a decent amount of insight.
Yeah, thank you. And Danny, it was mentioned earlier that a lot of young people today, they won't remember 9/11. It's not like maybe for all of us where we probably all remember where we were and what happened when we heard the news. How's it going? What are the numbers like on all 4?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a younger younger people won't remember it, won't have lived through it, and won't remember where they were because they might not have even been born even. But I think, look, we all, like I was saying, I think it's such a defining moment in modern history that we are reminded of it at every. We're reminded of it a lot in programming and also just the way we live our lives, right? So I think young people have got a particular interest in it because it's defined a lot of the way we live and our relationship with the Middle East and our relationship with Britain, with America too. So so far it's doing well on the, it's only been up for 36 hours on our platform, on all four, but the numbers are good. The numbers are encouraging. They are higher than we would expect at this point, which indicates that it's a younger audience watching it. So that's very, very encouraging and the thing that we really hoped for.
Yeah, and Bill, same thing. Obviously, it hasn't aired in the US yet, but similar idea of, in a way, yes, this is a 9/11 story, but actually it is the story of Gen Z kids growing up, becoming young adults in America. So I'm really interested to know your thoughts on how you hoped to position this film, how you hope to react and kind of engage with younger audiences in America.
Well, it's an interesting film for those who watch it here because people have different reactions to it depending how old they are too. Some of the older audience, like these are some of their kids, and you're very much looking at the world that we made. I found it a very humbling watch. Some of the things that perhaps I went into this expecting the kids felt differently about. I think, as Liz points out, there's a lot of different perspective. And I think that it's, I really want to publicly say this. I think what the team did is absolutely amazing. I mean, the amount of time that they had with these kids wasn't enormous, because of COVID. And you really see them go through this journey over the course of their lives. And I think just now they're really getting that they are somewhat talismanic for this event. And as they wrestle with themselves, you get to feel it. So I think, to Danny's point, on a different platform for us than normal broadcasts, I expect that younger people will gravitate to it. I also think in all the territories, this is going to have a long tail. People will come to it and find it because it really is a snapshot of 20 years. And it's really surprising in some of the things that people react to. And, I think also, I think Liz made a really good point that we went from a period of unity to a lot of division right now, but then it's not always along the lines that one might think, or an audience member of a certain age might think. There are some of these kids who are on one particular persuasion, but they might have a different kind of feeling about criminal justice reform or about, the George Floyd murders and Black murder and Black Lives Matter and so forth. So I think there's something for everybody in the film in ways that they might not expect. So I think that we'll see good pickup across all ages.
Yeah, thank you. We've got quite a few questions flooding in. To begin with, John, I wanted to find out if there is any intention to stay in touch with the families and the people that you spoke to. We have a question around, did the contributors get to meet up with each other? Have there been any kind of virtual meetups?
It's funny, I've been asked 2 or 3 times, are we going to do, it's like 7 Up again, are we going to do a 30 Up? Are we going to do something on the 30th anniversary? And I'm starting to think actually it's quite an interesting idea. And also because the kids themselves will be reaching the same age as their fathers were at the point of their sad deaths on 9/11. And I think, it's maybe interesting tracking to them and tracking them and seeing what happens to them in the next 10 years. And if the next 10 or anything like the last 20, then that's quite a journey. If things had been normal, I'm sure we would have brought all the kids together at the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum at Ground Zero in New York. And but we couldn't do that because of COVID. And I think a lot of Liz would be able to speak to this because I think they were all really keen to meet each other and may well do so separately because there's this very exclusive club of 105 of them with this unique and powerful emotional connection. And that, it would have been great to be able to do that, but sadly you just can't do that sort of thing at the moment.
Yeah. And what kind of responsibility do you feel as the producers of this programme, having taken these 20-year-olds through 19 to 20-year-olds through potentially for the first time a really difficult journey?
Liz, I think that's for you.
All right. Well, I mean, a lot is the short answer. But after, I mean, as I said earlier, a really important part of the casting was making sure that they understood what we were asking of them and where we hoped they would go. And, you know, it's not like no one's ever thought of interviewing these people before. They've had, you know, there hasn't been a documentary like this, but they've been approached by the media since they were babies. They've done news things, and some of the 105 have done a lot of media, and we specifically steered away from people who kind of had a feeling of apatness to the story because they were used to telling it. These people were much, I mean, you see in the film that Ronald's done quite a bit of press, but nothing like this. And the rest of them hadn't spoken to anyone really before. And, you know, we made sure they understood what was involved. We've sent them all, you know, emails about support that's available. We've, you know, given them advice about how to watch the film. As John said, we would have liked to have watched it all together. They're watching it with their families, and we're getting good feedback from them. But yeah, I mean, we're not dropping our relationship now by any means. And we had a PBS press event last week, which several of them were at, and a couple of them said it had been quite therapeutic having these conversations they kind of wanted to have but hadn't had before. And as you mentioned, they all did express the desire. They said it was amazing to hear other people who had been through what they'd been through. They felt very alone. And I really hope somebody involved in the production will find a way to coordinate some sort of virtual meetup, because I think they'd get a lot out of that.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting. And I do hope that the appropriate support is available to them and indeed to the entire production team. It's a really emotional and critical story and path. We have a question here saying, did the families realise they were speaking for a generation? Liz, you're nodding your head there. You've spoken a lot about being very, very clear about the expectations from the beginning.
Just very briefly, I mean, the pitch they were given before I was on board, when the film was initially called Generation 9/11, the Arrow had developed something that was very explicitly, this isn't just about your loss. This is also about what it's been like growing up over the last 20 years, what the world, you know, how you hope to shape the world and how the world has shaped you. So, you know, we did pitch this as a tell us about your generation. And a lot of the interview had nothing to do with 9/11, was about generational perspectives, you know, what it's like being 19 now. So yeah, they were all really enthusiastic about the chance to say how they saw the world.
Danny and Bill, another question. Did the broadcasters have opinions at the edit stage? I'm sure that you would have had opinions, and to what extent are you able to feed those in?
We never have opinions. And if we do, they don't get listened to. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, of course. I mean, look, we actually probably it was the moment where we might have diverged slightly, actually, with PBS, just partly because of our our running times, but also we just wanted, we were less we were less interested on the focus of some of these very specific American events that might not have resonated quite in the same way with a UK audience when you reference like the shootings and so on. So that was the only moment where we probably diverged a tiny bit, and that was based on what we thought audiences really would resonate more. So, but yeah, we did. I mean, it was a brilliant process. I mean, it was one of my commissioning editors who did the day-to-day editorial on it, and he loved the process and found it very creative and really collaborative with everyone, all the partners, including, you know, Bill and ARTE, but of course everyone who would the producers too.
I've worked on many co-pros, and they can be a complete and utter nightmare. The partners can be really assertive about the version they want and don't really care about what country X or country Y want. They want their version. And the nightmare is you end up making 2 or 3 very different versions of a film. And it's a real pain, and the only thing that suffers is the film itself. And I'm not just saying it because they're on the screen in front of me, but there was a really good ethos on this production from the very early days. I remember we all had a meeting in Channel 4, and the French and Bill were over, about working together and essentially making the same film. There were that small change that Danny mentioned, and in part was because their version was half an hour shorter because of the reality of Channel 4 running times. But there was an incredibly good, there was spirited discussion when we selected from the 20 to get our 7 or 6 characters, but it was consensus prevailed, and everybody worked in that spirit from day one of the production to the end. And it doesn't always happen, often it doesn't. And it really made a difference. And ultimately, it's a win-win, because Channel 4, PBS, ARTE are getting a very high quality, well-made film, and they're sharing the cost. And when you get a decent budget is about time. Budget buys you time. It was that budget that bought us the 9 months to research the 105 characters and present them with 55 and then 20 characters that you could pick from a really rich selection of individuals. And it was that money that gave you 22, 23 weeks in an edit, because this is such a complex film to edit. Often in documentaries, you have 6, 7, 8 weeks time. You had that amount of time to craft something. So that's why it's win-win. And those are the factors that make it, when it works, such a good way to go. And I wish it was always like that. But when you have a good experience like this, it makes you want to continue doing it.
I would just add that, as John pointed out from the beginning of that meeting in Channel 4, we all kind of agreed and knew what we were largely trying to do, and find the best ways to get there. And for me, some of the conversations we had, I found really illustrative about things that maybe were important or what resonated with me as an American commissioner, how it was seen from other points of view. And as much as we could, we tried to find ways to kind of get that sentiment in there a little bit. The French had no idea what a prom even is. I know for you all, it's classical, music. For us, it's when you're 18, you have a big formal dance. It's hugely important here. So how you kind of get through these cultural references, and I think that Liz being there as someone in both places, an American living in London, she found ways to kind of navigate through and give us all kind of the points we were trying to make and minimizing some of the things that were potentially tangents. But to me, I think it goes to the theme we said about this from the beginning, is we all knew what we were trying to do, and it was that larger goal that kind of drove us all.
That was the one stipulation that we had. Bill was from day one, I want an American director on this. Now, that's a worry if you're trying to run a production out of London. And to give Channel 4 their credit and ARTE, they understood where Bill was coming from, because he wanted that understanding. But we were fortunate in finding Liz, that we had someone who'd grown up in America, who'd been in New York on 9/11, but had spent a lot of time in Britain. So understood sensibilities on both sides of the Atlantic. But that's another good example of something very important for one partner that the other two could work with. And I remember one of Danny's commissioning editors, who's moved on, who's from a Muslim background herself, was very strongly talking passionately about the need for that voice. Of course, everyone wanted that, but she really drove that initiative because it was a difficult challenge, and I'm so pleased that we were able to find Faraz. But again, we all listened to her and we're able to work together to accommodate that. So it's really good when it happens well, and it's a nightmare when it doesn't.
And I understand you had a French editor, is that right?
Liz?
Yes, Claire Guillon was the editor. She's absolutely brilliant. I've worked with her before. She's been in London for a very long time and would say that her French sensibility is slightly muted, but I'm sure it helped. She's fantastic.
And Bill, you and Danny have both stress the importance of being able to work well with commissioning partners and the desire to do more. And I believe, feel free to tell us all, you have some projects in the pipeline. But to what extent is that really important in shaping the stories that you want to tell and the way that the programs are made for PBS?
Well, Danny said this earlier, is like there's a desire to do that. You need to find the right project that it really works on. And I think that, as a variety service in PBS, like we're airing Downton Abbey and Call the Midwife. So there's that audience that's there, but there's also, this desire that we have, and we feel as the PSB in the States, like we want to tell more additional stories that you maybe have a global point of view or a different attitude. We co-pro with the BBC on some things, and as everybody knows, Channel 4 has a little bit different sensibility than other networks, and I want to do as much as we possibly can. And I think that when there are certain topics that need to be covered in a certain way or a certain point of view, who are your partners and the people that you know well. And as I said in the beginning, the role of all of us in these commissioning spaces, it's to stay as close to the production community as we can, but we also talk to each other a lot. What are some interests? What are some things that we share alignment on, and can kind of elevate projects by both of us putting in resources that is to, as John said, to elevate some of these budgets. We're not the streamers. We don't have an unlimited checkbook, but I think we also have some different sensibilities too. So the more that we can come together to do that, the better. And I think especially when it comes to some cultural stories, sometimes finding those that line up can be trickier. Straight factual can be easier. But again, the sensibility that we have and an interest in telling stories from maybe a different kind of a point of view. And, when you find people that you have that familiarity with and a similar sensibility, you maximize it and you try to do as much as you can while you can.
Yeah, I look forward to some more brilliant collaborations. We have another question asking, noticing a credit to Tuesday's Child. I believe that's the production company. What was their involvement? John, I think that's for you.
They're the organization that connects to, works with a lot of the families that lost a loved one in 9/11. And I think Lucy will correct me on this, but I think they, or Liz, they were one of the people we worked with that had some database about the fathers who died when they're waiting for expectant, waiting for the partner for the baby to arrive. And I think they had a list, and then we managed to find beyond that. But Lucy was there, and I think we worked with them in other things as well.
Yes, I think the important thing is, when you're approaching these families, it was you touched on it earlier as well. It's important to be so sensitive and to think about their overall well-being, not just their involvement in the film. And we didn't want to just cold reach out to families because we'd seen them on a news program or they'd been in this documentary. We wanted to do things and make them realize that we were very genuine, and this was a collaboration. And we worked with Tuesday's Child early in some of the early development to make some of that initial contact, so that families would know that we were coming from a very genuine place and we wanted to reach out collaboratively. And so that was their involvement.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It speaks more to those collaborations and how we work together to really get the best stories. Something else I found really interesting, which we alluded to earlier, is that the sheer amount that is mentioned throughout the programme. So of course we have the stories of the 6 or 7 contributors. I was really fascinated by the stories of the widows and of the other siblings. And I think the widows in particular, and some of them you got a brief mention, and then I thought, oh, well, what was that? Can I find out more about those stories? And I have to say, the 2 that really stuck out was the lady who delivers TED Talks, whose husband was seemingly sat near or next to one of the terrorists on the plane. And the other one that I was really, really interested to know more about, where do I find out more about setting up a group and fundraising, recognising that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of widows in Afghanistan and wider in the Middle East who are living the same lives as these women, the mothers in the USA. Could you tell me a little bit about how you make a decision of which of those bits to include and how you don't just go down a rabbit hole in that story? And also, could you tell me where I can find out more? Because I think they're fantastic stories.
I think I'd
Liz,
turn to Liz on that one.
Absolutely yours.
Yeah, I mean, the mantra was, this is the kids' POV. So, there were lots of the widows were amazing. I mean, all of them, I would say. And in an early cut, when all we had was the box cam to work with, their stories were much longer because we were so taken with them. But, this is a film about Generation 9/11, children of 9/11, and we had to be very rigorous about not going too far down those rabbit holes. They were amazing. They had such profound things to say, all of them. But yeah, wasn't their story. They set up we tried to include them only insofar as their experience had shaped the children. That was kind of what we kept in the back of our minds. And Susan Rettig is, if you look her up, you'll find her TED Talk. And I think, oh God, Beyond the 11th, that's the name of her charity, which she set up working with Afghan women. So you should be able to, with those pieces of information, RET, there you go. You should be able to find her online. And she is amazing. And her life is, she devoted herself to charity work and also lifestyle coaching, because she's worked that into a way of seeing the world and understanding the world and how you're shaped by your experiences. But yeah, the mothers were incredible.
Yeah, and also really interesting in the context of the stories of the kids, because they've grown up with this. And there's a really touching moment with Nick and his mother, I believe, at the 9/11 memorial in New York, where he basically says, this is your story, not mine. You had to live through that. I wasn't even born. No more spoilers. Please do all go and watch it if you haven't already. It's streaming now on all 4. And if you're not in the UK, then do stand by, because it's coming to you soon. I'm afraid we're just about running out of time. Thanks everyone for the questions that you sent in, and a huge thank you to our panel, our international panel today. We have Bill Gardner, Danny Horan, John Smithson, Lucy Ridout, and Liz Merman. Huge thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This session will be available to catch up and watch again, or please do share it if you enjoyed it. You can find it on the RTS London YouTube channel. Please do subscribe to the channel to watch other events from RTS London as well. We also have an RTS London podcast, so you can search for that and listen if you prefer to our past events. We really hope to be able to return to some in-person sessions in London soon in the autumn. We will also continue to hold some online events. Have a look at the RTS London website. That's rts.org.uk/region/London, and we'll list all of our upcoming events on there. Huge thanks again to my panel. Thank you all for attending this online session, and have a lovely rest of day. Goodbye.